Welcome to American Press Productions, independent political analysis. These are today's top stories. Peppa Pig, a popular children's TV show which airs in more than 180 countries, has been accused of being sexist and oppressing women by the London Fire Brigade. What evil has the show brought upon women all over the world? It referred to a firefighter as a fireman. The London Fire Brigade also critiqued a popular British children's show called Fireman Sam for daring to use a gendered term. As is often the case with these critics of culture, their festering spirits, their cantankerous souls are often as dark and devoid of all meaning, just as their critiques of culture are. Users of Twitter responded to the London Fire Brigade with pictures from Peppa Pig books that showed entire pages with only female firefighters saving the day. May God help anyone in England who needs to be saved from a fire. There was a case back in 2012 where a middle-aged man had a seizure and fell into a pond only 3 feet deep. He lay in the water face down. Emergency services were called. A constable and ambulance worker arrived, but already on the scene was a local fireman standing there, watching. The constable rushed to take off his body armor. He asked the firefighter for his life vest, you know, the thing that's made to float in water and save people from drowning. The fireman refused. He then told the constable he was not allowed to get into the water. Keep in mind, the middle-aged man was floating face down in the water during all of this. When the constable informed the fireman that he was going in, the fireman radioed the control room, who said that per regulations, the constable was not allowed to get into the water. The ambulance worker informed the fireman that he was trained to swim in currents seen in whitewater rafting. The fireman told him he was not allowed to enter either. The middle-aged man died. His body was not retrieved from the water for over 30 minutes. An autopsy concluded he likely would have survived if he was pulled from the water when the fireman, constable, or ambulance worker arrived. The eyewitness who called emergency services told reporters that when he made the call, he was informed that a specialist team was on the way to save the drowning man. The eyewitness walked up to the fireman and asked why he wasn't going in the water. The fireman cited health and safety reasons. The eyewitness told a reporter, quote, "After the incident, I was unable to sleep because I kept blaming myself, and now I have to live with it." End quote. Joke presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren today made a statement against anti-Semitism, saying it has no place in Massachusetts. The prompt for this bold stance is apparently the case of defaced tombstones in a Jewish cemetery in Fall River, Massachusetts. The tombstones had swastikas written on them, as well as phrases such as "expel the Jew" and "Heil Hitler." The person in charge of the cemetery, Jeffrey Weissman, asked, "How do you explain something like this to people?" He said his grandson asked him, "Why here?" Weissman's explanation, quote, "It's right after the mass shooting in New Zealand. I'm almost positive it was connected in some way. The white supremacists had to show their ugly head again." End quote. There was another familiar phrase written on the tombstones. "This is MAGA country." You may be familiar with the phrase if you followed the Jussie Smollett saga. Jussie, a gay black Jewish person, mailed himself a threatening letter, then paid 2 black men to beat him up. Jussie told the police and the news media that the men who beat him up were white. They wore MAGA hats and shouted the phrase, "This is MAGA country." Jussie Smollett is now facing multiple felony convictions for the farce. Quite the coincidence that the same phrase was used. Weissman also said, quote, "We've become a nation that, instead of leading the world, we're starting to fall apart. This nation has become so divided, and we have one person to thank for it." End quote. Could he be talking about the case of Juan Thompson, a black journalist who made at least 8 bomb threats to Jewish community centers and the Anti-Defamation League in 2016? The Riverfront Times, a St. Louis newspaper, wrote of Thompson's reasons for his actions. Quote, "Thompson had filed searing dispatches about injustices in Baltimore, Mississippi, and Chicago. He relished the opportunity to strike back at what he calls an oppressive, anti-black, racial supremacist capitalist system that kneecaps all but the country's rich and white in the pursuit of basic civil rights and opportunities." End quote. Or perhaps he's talking about the case of Michael Ron David Kadar, a Jewish man and dual citizen of the US and Israel, who was recently sentenced to 10 years in prison for making around 2,000 bomb threats to various Jewish centers across the US, such as Israeli embassies, synagogues, and the Anti-Defamation League. He also made threats to airplanes, causing emergency landings, and said that if fighter jets were scrambled, he would detonate the bomb. Kadar was responsible for almost every phoned-in anti-Semitic threat and bomb threats to Jewish centers in 2016. Whoever desecrated the Jewish tombstones in Fall River, Massachusetts, likely doesn't have long until their identity is revealed. Police are checking camera footage from nearby residents and businesses. Perhaps the perpetrator is right under Mr. Weissman's nose. Perhaps it is Mr. Weissman himself. It certainly wouldn't be the first time such a hoax was committed, nor, unfortunately, the last. There has been a troubling update to the Jussie Smollett saga. It seems he has friends in high places, very high places. But lucky for us, Jussie and his friends aren't very smart. Shortly after Jussie Smollett was arrested by the Chicago Police Department, Cook County State Attorney Kim Foxx recused herself from the case. Her given reason was that shortly after the hoax incident occurred, she contacted Smollett's family about the incident to hear their concerns and facilitate a connection for them with the Chicago Police Department. She said that based on an abundance of caution, she will remove herself from the case, but that wasn't the entire story. Before recusing herself, Kim Foxx urged Chicago Police Department Superintendent Eddie Johnson to turn the case over to the FBI. Why would she do that? According to emails and text messages obtained by the Chicago Sun-Times, Kim Foxx was put in contact with Smollett's family by now private attorney Tina Chen, who formerly served as chief of staff to Michelle Obama and as assistant to then-President Obama. Only 2 days after the hoax incident, an email was sent from Fox to Chen to let her know that she had urged Superintendent Eddie Johnson to give the case to the FBI. Chen responded, "OMG, this would be a huge victory." But the FBI never got their hands on the case. Chicago PD discovered it was a hoax and charged Smollett. Now the Fraternal Order of Police want Kim Foxx investigated by the Justice Department. But just how high up do Smollett's connections go? Did the Obamas know it was a hoax? There is a connection between Smollett and presidential candidate Kamala Harris. Before his arrest, Smollett attended several Harris events as a key figure. Only days after the hoax incident, Harris introduced a bill to the Senate that would make lynching a federal crime. She did so because Smollett claimed his attackers placed a noose around his neck. Is it possible that Harris and the Obamas are part of a conspiracy involved in this hoax incident? At this point, we only have speculation, but hope for a Justice Department investigation to reveal the truth. Perhaps the news media actually got it wrong when they characterized President Trump's criticisms of the FBI as the rantings and ravings of a madman.